In February, more than 70 Quakers from the Luton and Leighton area meeting gathered in Watford for an afternoon of discussion around the topic of inequality.
Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon. And a very warm welcome to Watford and to our Quaker event, which, as you know, is entitled Making Us More Equal, What We Ask of Politicians.
The first speaker of the afternoon was Suzanne Ismail of Quaker Peace and Social Witness
in Friends House on economic issues. And this conference has come at a really good time for us because we've worked on economic issues in QPSW for a very long time, and we've worked on a range of things from trade to labour rights and all sorts of stuff. And that's about inequality, but actually we've never really framed it that way before, and we're just starting to do a new piece of work that's much more overt on economic inequality. So you've got some of the resources from that in your pack. So it's great to be here. Your thinking is coinciding with ours, I feel.
She read two extracts from statements made by Britain Yearly Meeting of their concern for the current state of the economy.
And the first one is from the statement we made in 2012, and this talks about the anger that exists within the Yearly Meeting. Quakers in Britain deplore the increasing concentration of economic authority and social stratification that transmits inequality across generations. We are angered that the United Kingdom now has a greater disparity in income than at any time since the Second World War, and we are compelled to speak out against government policy that makes cuts in spending that promote inequality. We challenge the culture and ethos that enables the leader of finance and industry to take salaries and bonuses that are many hundreds of times larger than those of their employees. Deepening economic inequality cannot continue indefinitely without a risk of violence and oppression. The statement that we made last year, that Colin has read a little bit of it, talks a lot about action and about we need to take action to address the growing inequality of wealth found in our country. And it talks a lot about the work that Friends are doing locally in food banks, at lunch clubs, at citizens and advice bureaus to address the worst effects of poverty within our communities. But it also says, however, action that aims merely to alleviate the worst effects of inequality is not enough. As we wrestle with the implications of our testimony to equality, Quakers feel called to act more radically to tackle the underlying causes.
She noted that community cohesion was in jeopardy and that our testimonies for peace and equality call us to action.
We also talk about the value of community. Some Friends say we have a testimony to community. But of course, inequality, the extent of inequality that we're experiencing now has got some fundamental implications for social cohesiveness. For a start, it starts to split communities apart. You get the rich and the poor living in different places, using different services. That's got some fundamental implications, I think, for our ability to live together in community. The 2012 statement that I read out earlier makes quite clear that there are implications for our peace testimony. Extreme levels of inequality, they foster social divisions. They make the ones that are already there a little bit harder. New ones are more likely to emerge. So this is a peace issue as well, Friends.
The next speaker was Duncan Exley, who spoke of the changes in wealth parity that have grown significantly over the years.
Now, levels of income inequality in the UK are particularly stark. You can see a league table of developed countries there, and that's looking at the standard international measure is called the Gini coefficient, and you can see the red bar is us, and we are way up to the top of the international league table there, behind Mexico, Israel and the US. One of the highest levels of income inequality outside of the developing world. But it hasn't always looked like that. The trend in the 20th century throughout the developing world was for income inequality to fall until about 3/4 of the way through the century. And at that point, UK income inequality wasn't very remarkable. We were about mid-table. But then from the 1970s, it rose again. We can see from the 70s there a real change to about 1990 or so, and then a bit more of a rise there, but it's sort of levelled off. But we've levelled off at quite a bad place. I'm often told, and I expect that quite a lot of you will often be told, that, well, you know, the world isn't fair, is it? You know, as if high levels of inequality are the way of the world, they're just the way things are, but they're not the way of all the world. There's other places that are different, and they're not the way things have always been here. Now, most of the growth in inequality was not the gap between the poor and the rest of us, it was the gap between the rich and the rest in this country. Now, that can be a bit difficult to comprehend because, you know, looking at a difference in inequality between a Gini of 0.24 and a Gini of 0.36 doesn't mean anything to anyone. So a couple of examples of it is, firstly, within the top 1% of people that often get talked about. If you were the highest paid member of staff in a FTSE 100 company, in 1997, you could expect to be getting 47 times the pay of the average worker, not the bottom person, the average worker. That little box there. The blue is your pay and the red is the average worker's pay. And here's a stick. Now, as you can see, by 2012, that had gone up an awful lot. So that a FTSE chief executive was getting 133 times what their average colleague was getting paid. Or, to put it another way, by 2012, the average worker was being valued at about 0.75% of what the chief exec was being valued at. There's a strong consensus among experts that inequality is harmful. Some very, very clear statistics that people who live in more unequal societies in income terms are more likely to suffer from mental health problems and from addictions. We're more likely to be obese. Our children are more likely to die in infancy. We're more likely to be violent. And our life chances are more likely to be determined by where we're born. In fact, if you, and I'm often accused of being against aspiration, but if you want to become the manager of a company, if you want to become a judge, if you want to become a politician, there is literally, outside of the developed world, there is nowhere on the planet that someone from an average background serves a less good chance than here in the UK of doing that. Research now suggests that lowering the wage of a low-paid worker decreases their productivity by a greater amount than increasing the wage of a high-paid worker increases theirs. This would suggest that increases in wage inequality decrease productivity. There's also evidence that inequality damaged the operation of democracy itself. There is a very clear trend, like the graph I showed you, showing that where there is more inequality, there is less voter turnout. There is less people engaging with things. There is less people trusting companies, politicians, institutions in general. And I think that's problematic for all of us because it means that the things that hold us together as a society are being broken apart by people seeing themselves in almost different castes.
Key points from the 4 workshop discussions led by Fuel Poverty Action, John Long speaking about positive money, and Martina Weitsch speaking about tax justice, were fed back during a plenary session entitled Harvesting. Fuel Poverty Action campaigns on behalf of those too poor to heat their homes in winter. John Long talked about Positive Money's campaign to put money into the economy and not the banks.
If you're very rich
And Martina Weitsch spoke about taxing for the public good.
that goes back to the taxman, which is as it should be.
After the plenary session, Duncan Exley outlined a role for Quakers to take on the challenges the afternoon had set us.
When I said to one of my friends on Friday night, and they said, "What are you doing on Sunday?" I said, "I'm going to talk to Quakers about things." And I went, "Oh, do Quakers do talking?" And actually, yes, you do. But that is really, really important, because when people get those impressions that the things that are repeated again and again and again without evidence normally, that, okay, this inequality is a way of the world, that getting away with tax is what everybody does and what everyone wants to do. That's the way things happen. That we don't talk about how much people get paid because we're British. Actually, no. That whole thing about bearing witness, that whole thing about speaking truth to power, in campaign after campaign after campaign around the world, it has been people who have done that, who have made things better. And I think that if anything Quakers can do, it is talking that and making sure that no one can avoid talking about justice.